Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session. I am joined here with my co-presenters, and my name is Michelle Burris. I am a fellow at the Century Foundation, and I am honored to present to you on the topic, Achieving Racial Equity and the Future of Manufacturing, where we will expound more on our industry and inclusion cohort. For an agenda, the co-presenters and I will first introduce ourselves, followed by a slide presentation. We will then have a panel discussion. We are honored to have Ms. Erica Staley with us, and then we will join live for a question and answer session. First, we will begin with introductions. As I mentioned, I work at the Century Foundation. We are a 102-year-old nonprofit policy think tank located in DC and New York, and I work on the intersections of workforce development and racial equity. I will now pass it to my colleagues, Andy, Erica, and followed by Thanu.
Good afternoon. Thanks to everyone for being at the conference. I'm Andrew Stetner. I'm a senior fellow at the Century Foundation. Erica?
Hi, this is Erica Staley, Executive Director at Manufacturing Renaissance based here in Chicago.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Thanu Kumar, and I'm a workforce development specialist with the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. Just a little bit about the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, or the UMA. We're a national coalition of organizations and individuals that are working to create more equitable economies by building inclusive manufacturing economies. And these organizations that comprise the UMA are directly connected to workforce and community economic development. They include workforce providers, economic development practitioners, city planning agencies, and manufacturers, as well as those that may be less traditionally part of the economic development ecosystem, including faith-based organizations and social service providers. But what ties them all together is that they're working to create more equitable pathways into employment, sustain small manufacturing businesses, and create new opportunities for innovation and growth. And what UMA does is we connect these organizations. We lift up and showcase local innovative practices. We also build connections to help practitioners deepen their local impact while building a national movement. And we do this through communities of practice, such as the Industry Inclusion Cohort, which we'll talk about today, policy research, and then also national convenings.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the background research and how we got here. Why is this such an important topic for us to address together? Next slide. So, manufacturing has had, some periods of up and downs in American history. A long period of what we sometimes call deindustrialization, closing of factories, moving of, thousands of factories and millions of jobs from the United States to Mexico and China as a result of trade policies and changes in technology. But manufacturing really has been on the rebound, in particular since 2010, and some of the federal support for manufacturing and just a rebound and increased competitiveness on demand for US manufacturing. But that recovery will be limited by workforce challenges. Manufacturing has an aging workforce, and it is growing. Those two things combined means that the manufacturing sector will have 2 million unfilled jobs by 2030. And that change in manufacturing, that recovery is coming in a real change of what the jobs look like. Manufacturing jobs historically, even if they're well paid, had a bad reputation for being dirty, dangerous, and repetitive. And as technology has changed the face of manufacturing, that's no longer true. Manufacturing that's in the United States in particular has become much more high technology, and much of the work that workers are doing is the intersection of human and machine in a new way that is a tremendously different environment. Many clean manufacturing, these are tech jobs for the most part. But because of that, we really need new approaches for workforce and economic development that draw new populations into manufacturing and train workers to prepare them in really different ways. Go to the next slide. So the first issue, and the issue that this project is really trained on, is the fact that the manufacturing workforce of today does not reflect the manufacturing workforce of tomorrow. You see here, on this slide, nearly 2/3 of workers in manufacturing are white and non-Hispanic. Just under now 10% of the manufacturing workforce identifies as Black, and that shortage of being underrepresented in the population, the Black workforce is about 11% of the overall population, is 300,000 jobs for Black workers lost alone. And moreover, manufacturing is 70% male. And women are really shut out of many manufacturing jobs, especially what we call middle skill jobs, those jobs that pay well, but don't require a 4-year college degree. So we can go to the next slide. And there is a lot of occupational segregation in manufacturing. There are people of color in manufacturing. You can see, you can see that they're concentrated, however, in production jobs. These are the jobs on the factory floor, and are underrepresented in management, owning a company, managing a company, business and financial jobs. And so there are people of color in manufacturing, but we need them to be fully participatory in the future of manufacturing. So, this is some of the change, in manufacturing. In cities like Chicago, where Erica is from, or Detroit, where I'm from, manufacturing jobs, in the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s, they were broadly accessible. There was a factory down the street that was kind of always hiring. It was like Amazon is today, to be honest, going through workers on the production floor. These were well-known employers. Yes, there were inequities for people of color, but there were pathways that if you were willing to work hard, and had a strong back, you could enter into a factory and in many cases, create a living wage job and support a family on manufacturing. Indeed, manufacturing was one of the pillars of the Black middle class, especially in the North after the Great Migration. But that's really changed today. So there are in these millions of jobs available, there are career ladders and opportunities to build a middle class life and generational wealth, but this changed. The jobs are less accessible. Those employers are more hidden. The skills that are needed to function effectively on the factory floor. Now, let's be clear, not everyone in the manufacturing sector needs to have a college degree, but most of the jobs out there are going to require you to have strong high school levels of math, literacy, and numeracy to work there. The employers are smaller, they're diffuse, so it's more difficult to have manufacturing serve in that way it did in the past. We can go to the next slide. So, we've been looking at this, for the last several years. We, particularly in, some of the traditional cities like Baltimore, where today's conference is, or in Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo. And we did a deep dive with the University of Illinois Chicago with the help of our speaker, Erica from Manufacturing Renaissance, to look at what would be like to help manufacturing in Chicago, the city of broad shoulders, a city with a deep manufacturing history, to help manufacturing recover, and also to help have more opportunities for Black and Latino communities in the city. At the time of our study, we found that 1/3 of young Black men were either out of school or out of work, and this was tied, to a crisis of violence and gun violence in many Chicago neighborhoods. At the same time, as this huge youth unemployment, there were thousands of unfilled manufacturing jobs in the Chicago area, and there still are today. The number is growing, and the largest group of those jobs, you can enter into them with less than 2 years experience and only a high school degree. So although this sector has changed in what it's requiring, there is still a pathway for individuals, that are coming out of prison, that need to go back and get a high school degree those pathways still remain there in cities like Chicago. But go next slide, Michelle. But there are problems as well. This shows two maps. The map on the right is the concentration of population with the blue dots representing African American populations and the red dots representing Hispanic and the green white population centers. And you can see in particular African Americans concentrated on the west side of the city of Chicago and the south side of Chicago. They're far away from the jobs on the left side. The darker colors are where the most manufacturing jobs that have moved out of the city and have moved more to the suburbs. So we have to figure out new ways of transporting people to work in different parts of the city. And this is a challenge that's occurred across the country. As there was kind of a period of deindustrialization when factories either survived or reopened, they looked for cheaper, larger tracts of land in the suburbs to start factories. So that is a limiting factor in taking advantage of opportunities in manufacturing. We can go to the next slide. So we are trying to take advantage of the real opportunity and overcome some of these challenges. This is a picture of then former Vice President Joe Biden standing with the Century Foundation and allies like Manufacturing Renaissance or Manufacturing Alliance as we unveiled a $2 billion plan to revitalize manufacturing in 2018. Well, as president, President Biden proposed a $200 billion plan to revitalize manufacturing. And as COVID-19 strained supply chains, as an administration deeply committed to racial equity, look to help people get into good job opportunities, there is a tremendous opportunity to make that connection between communities looking for good paying jobs and the companies needing them, bridging some of those challenges and gaps in terms of skills preparation and job placement. Already $3 billion has gone out from the American Rescue Plan Act on to inclusive economic and workforce development strategies. And there is another piece of major legislation, the America Competes Act, moving through Congress that would invest even more in some of the skills and economic development challenges. So we see a moment of opportunity here. The way that we're trying to capitalize on that moment of opportunity is to work with leading workforce development organizations and community colleges to come up with the models that will fill the manufacturing jobs gap and do so by diversifying a workforce to look more equitable today than it has looked in the past. We can go to the next slide. So the work that Tanu will detail some of the findings on was work we started in January 2020. We selected through an application process 8 leading workforce development organizations in 6 cities. And for this iteration of the cohort, all in what we might call traditional, Midwestern manufacturing cities, Northeastern cities like Baltimore, Buffalo, Cleveland, Chicago, and Milwaukee, but intentionally working with organizations, some of whom have been doing this for decades, connecting urban communities of color into manufacturing jobs, and also newer organizations that have been only doing this for 1 or 2 years, as increased attention has been placed on the need for new generation manufacturing workers and companies that are working together, with their community groups in new ways, new potentials. And we met many organizations as we built that agenda. We presented it to then former Vice President Biden, in cities, that were not looking at manufacturing as something of the past, but looking at it as a vibrant sector and a source of opportunity and wealth into the future. So I'll turn it over to Tanu, who will tell you some of the findings about our work with the cohort. Here you can see some of the staff and leadership from the organizations involved.
Thank you so much, Andy. Yeah, so I'm going to touch now on some of the learnings and implications from our first cohort, especially for workforce education and training. These takeaways have really helped us to think about and design our approach and refine our approach, especially for our second cohort, which Michelle will talk about in more detail later on. But what we learned is that credentialing or industry recognized credentials are really a good point into manufacturing, and they're critical, but they're not sufficient to enable people to enter successful career paths into higher paying positions and ultimately see that type of career progression that can lead into leadership roles and also potentially ownership roles. And what we also heard is that, and what we also learned is that in order to make this shift, what is needed really is a reframing of the way that we view worker readiness and organizations and organizational development. And what we need to do is move away from this mindset that's more deficit oriented, that just looks at particularly at certain skills as an indicator, and instead use a more holistic, learning oriented framework that can help us think about how to prepare workers for continuous evolution of learning and career advancement. That's more fluid, as our colleague Ron Williams says. This mindset not only supports workers, but it can also help organizations, and it can help them become better prepared to support workers along a career trajectory, to provide continuous learning, and also to accept and encourage workers along these journeys. We also need to elevate this into two-year institutions and beyond, so that students and workers are better prepared to not only enter the manufacturing workforce at an entry level, but also to succeed in those leadership and ownership roles. Another important learning was the need to be aware of and better prepared to meet the needs of students and workers who may have experienced trauma or faced other challenges in their lives that have impacted their ability to feel safe, connected, and really succeed in schools or in the workplace. So beyond helping students meet tangible barriers such as transportation and childcare, we also need to look to trauma-informed approaches. So these are emotionally safe approaches, approaches that provide peer support, emotional support, an understanding of the types of racism and discrimination that people may have faced and what impacts that can have on the workplace and their ability to succeed. These approaches also require a great deal of patience and understanding. And ultimately, they can foster more belongingness in the workplace and result in more successful, racially conscious industry partnerships. Next slide, please. So these are a few of the comments from our cohort one, from some roundtables that we held during the first cohort. And these two quotes here really reflect the need for a shift towards a more learning-oriented mindset, which focuses on more than just an industry credential, but also things like learning soft skills and network building, and really connections to the right types of people and potential career opportunities. Next slide, please. And on this slide, there are quotes that really speak to how manufacturing has historically led in terms of representation in the workforce, but how much work there really still is to be done. And, you know, that I think this last one really speaks to this, you know, if you don't see people like you, how will you see the opportunity for engagement or mobility? And I wonder if, Erica, if you have any, just given your, you know, direct experience with this and your participation in the first cohort, if there's anything here you would like to add about this, this particular quote.
Absolutely. That is, I mean, I'm nodding my head the whole presentation. I mean, we obviously participated emphasizing these key points. And we've seen it play out in our work in Chicago that necessity, like we need to make sure that is covered, but so much of the success of the outcome are young people seeing that and feeling that they belong, that they feel protected, that they feel.
Erica, I'm just going to pause for 1 second. Your audio is going a little bit in and out. I don't know if it's a little, we can hear you now.
Okay, yeah,
yeah. It still went out for us.
Okay, sorry. I don't know what's going on. Let's see,
Why don't you turn off your video for a second, just so let's just see the mic go better that way.
Okay, is that better?
That's better.
Okay. I was just gonna emphasize training absolutely gets them in the door, but their retention, their sense career for me is mostly about that belongingness, the other supports and mentorship that are important for them transitioning and integrating into this new environment that for most of them is very, is almost come from to a manufacturing company. So anyway, so I really appreciate this being elevated as one of the.
Thanks, Erica, and we'll make sure to get the audio issue resolved before our panel discussion. But I'll take on our last few slides here. So as Thanu and Erica stated, we really are looking to build a model. And from the industry roundtables and through participation in the cohort, we are seeking to build a model of impactful credentialing. And this model stems from our report titled A Blueprint for Action, written by Andrew Stetner and Dr. Ronald Williams, who is helping to chair the conference here at Coppin State University. And from the reports, we found that in order to have a blueprint for action, we have to seek racially conscious industry partnerships. And so these reports are available on the Century Foundation's and the Urban Manufacturing Alliance's websites, where readers can learn more about how to forge these partnerships and also how to bring in educational institutions. So as I mentioned, we are headed toward a theory of impactful credentialing, which is our model that we will be building with 12 community colleges. And when we say impactful credentialing, we define this as aligning the needs of local employers with credentials. And so we are working with participants such as community colleges and historically Black colleges such as yourselves, community leaders, the K-12 educational system, and also regional manufacturer coalitions. Through their participation, we are employing culturally competent instruction and trauma-informed services to ensure that more students of color particularly are completing manufacturing credential programs. We believe that in the history, particularly of these partnerships, too often communities of color have been left out, as well as incumbent workers. And so we are seeking to use a holistic and a grassroots approach to really show the rebound of manufacturing and how we will not leave anyone behind. With that, we have chosen 12 community colleges to participate in this cohort. During the fall of last year, we had the opportunity to interview over 85 community colleges across the country to learn more about their initiatives on diversity, equity, and inclusion, to learn more about their interest in participating in the cohort, and to gauge the history and functioning of their manufacturing credential programs. We found a lot of interest, and we were able to select 12 community colleges to participate in this cohort, many of whom identify as Hispanic serving institutions, and one identifies as a historically Black community college, and that is Bishop State Community College located in Mobile, Alabama. When we spoke with the over 85 community colleges, we found major takeaways. The first is that manufacturing is career mobility. We had the opportunity to speak with colleagues, particularly in Louisiana, where they spoke about that less students are seeing manufacturing as the job that their grandfather worked in and as a low wage, low-skilled job, but really manufacturing is a career opportunity where people can have career mobility, and it incorporates advanced technology skills. So manufacturing is still in need of a paradigm shift. Although more and more students are seeing the opportunities in manufacturing, that paradigm shift is not happening fast enough, and it is our job to ensure that students know, particularly students of color, know the opportunities that exist in manufacturing and how it can be an entry into the middle class, particularly for those who do not have a four-year degree, and particularly to know the history of how manufacturing was entry into the middle class for Black communities. We also learned more about representation. It happens too often where we may have students who are walking past the manufacturing plant that is hiring and do not apply because the manager or the owner does not look like them. So we are seeking to work with community colleges who are also working with industry employers who have diverse employers who look like the people that they want to hire, who are reflective of communities of color. And we also want to dispel corporate myths, particularly that women are not interested in manufacturing or that students of color don't care about manufacturing. We want to present this opportunity and ensure that communities of color are aware of the diverse opportunities. As Thanu mentioned, we also have to address the holistic needs of students, particularly during COVID. We saw an increased need for internet access, housing security, childcare, and transportation. And those holistic needs still exist, particularly if a student who may be a mother, a single mom of two, may have to be at a manufacturing plant at 5 or 6 in the morning, and transportation does not allow for that, nor does childcare. And so it is important that we bring the managers of childcare and also those who are working in transportation together to ensure that barriers are being eradicated that prevent students of color from matriculating in manufacturing credential programs. In regards to our outcomes and goals, we have set an equity metric in the industry and inclusion cohort that by the end of the cohort, which is September 2023, we will have between 2,000 to 3,000 more adult learners of color completing a manufacturing credential, and this is across all 12 community colleges. We also are providing the community colleges with technical assistance, and we are employing trauma-informed and culturally competent approaches. This includes coaching. We are also bringing together our advisory board, who are diverse leaders in manufacturing across the sector and are able to provide the one-to-one coaching that our colleges need. We will also be visiting the campuses of these colleges and hosting industry roundtables, particularly with K-12 partners, employers, and community colleges to ensure that the credentials align with what the local employers deem as relevant. And last, we want to partner with attendees such as all of you and Coppin State to scale workforce development. We know that we cannot do this work alone, and it takes a national approach to ensure that we are able to fill the 2 million jobs in manufacturing by the next decade. So we look forward to learning more from all of you, and we are always available to speak more about our content. And with that, I will end with providing our contact information. The team here, Thanu, Andy, and Erica, we are always available to talk with you virtually or in person about the work that we're doing with Industry and Inclusion Cohort and how you can become involved. And with that, we are going to now transition into our panel discussion. Hello, everyone, and welcome again. We are ready to begin our panel presentation, and we are honored to have Erica Staley, Thanu Kumar, and Andrew Stetner to discuss why we should achieve racial equity in the future of manufacturing. So we will go ahead and get started, and I will pose my first question to you, Erica. We know for about 20 years you have been doing incredible work working with Black and Latinx communities in workforce development. Could you speak about your motivation for doing this work? And also, what were some of the challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thanks. Thanks for the question, Michelle. Yeah, so I was really fortunate to start my career actually doing environmental justice organizing. And actually, I was just finishing college or grad school actually in the San Francisco Bay Area, and really got the opportunity to, really work at that intersection of communities of color and environmental issues and challenges. And as I was, and it was a great way to start my career and, get involved in community, great community work. But along the way, I realized how the missing ingredient, the missing piece in that work was we were just reacting to, whether it was a particular company that wanted to expand a hazardous waste facility or a permitting process or some sort of thing that was that had been generated somewhere else that was just being inflicted upon a given community, and we were going to fight back. And after doing that a bunch of times, you just realize, wait, there has to be another way, for communities to kind of take more control over sort of their economic development destinies. And actually a light bulb went off for me when in process of, preparing for a particular campaign to deny a permit for hazardous waste facility. That one facility was the primary tax revenue generator for this county. It was a relatively rural county in Central California. And when I saw that, it was like, wait a second, no matter how good I am at, organizing protests and, getting people to come out, this is the economic development strategy for this county. They have decided hazardous waste was how they were going to create jobs and fill the tax coffers. And in fact, a lot of the farm workers that I was organizing at the time, a lot of them actually worked at this hazardous waste facility, certain times of the year. So this was also, so a lot of those things aligned. And then as I really started to got to understand the work of Manufacturing Renaissance, for me, it was just a natural next step for, how do we help communities really connect to not only these great career, living wage career opportunities, but really understanding there's opportunity in ownership. A lot of these companies are smaller companies, and a big reason why they often close is because lack of successor. And there's other reasons as well where, this is really a great pathway for developing economic opportunities in underdeveloped communities. And I've been fortunate to work for Manufacturing Renaissance for the last almost 15 years, developing a variety of projects on the west and south side of Chicago. And then with COVID-19, the work was already hard. We were already working in the context of crisis level unemployment. A lot of these issues that we're addressing are decades in the making. But at the end of the day, we were so dependent on our in-person interaction. So much of what we did with communities wasn't about emails I sent or flyers I posted. It was really about having, direct, communication, direct contact. And then when COVID-19 hit, all of a sudden you had to figure out how do you make these meaningful connections online. We managed to pivot and make it work, but we're definitely looking forward to re-innovating in person. But so much of this work is about relationships and building relationships and trust. And it's a little harder to do that sometimes online. So that's a little bit of our experience, but I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Erica. I mean, you really elaborated on why, we have to work with communities. And I just want to go a little deeper. You mentioned the concept of racial trust, and I think that's something that has to be really valued and showed when working with communities of color in manufacturing. We know that the theme of this conference is achieving racial equity in the future of manufacturing. Can you speak about why everyone should care and maybe how racial trust plays a role in that?
Absolutely. I mean, we are, our communities, across, the various racial groups. I mean, this is our, especially when you're thinking about young people, I mean, this is literally our future. And the fact that we have designed an economy that essentially systematically excludes huge portions of our society into, because they don't have access to just, good quality education or training or opportunity to learn about careers. And so I see this all the time where, like, on one hand, we have literally jobs, tens of thousands of jobs in the Chicagoland area going unfilled in manufacturing. I mean, companies, I hear it every day. Companies have just, dozens of open positions going unfilled for months. So they're stymied in their ability to grow the businesses. And, our country says how important small businesses are and manufacturing is. But yet, we have a situation where jobs on one hand going unfilled, and then literally in the same neighborhood, you have, a crisis level unemployment. people who want to work, people who have the capacity to work and learn, and who want to be productive and have opportunity, but just don't have the access or the haven't been exposed to what's possible. And so, so I feel like just by having a racial equity lens, we can sort of activate huge portions of our economy, of our communities in a way that, I mean, we're essentially letting, fruit right on the vine, literally, of like letting people just not have access to a way to, so this is a win-win if we do this right, that manufacturers get the talent, the next generation of talent that they need. They can, grow their businesses. They can be real, providing those good jobs and services in our community. And then on the other hand, we can have communities who are actually thriving, who are being able to pay taxes and, contribute to society in a lot of different ways and grow, have educations and whatnot. Anyway, so this is just a no-brainer. Like, if we want a thriving society and economy, we have to make sure everybody has access and has the supports they need to engage these relatively accessible economic opportunities. So yeah, it's just infuriating sometimes why we haven't done more in this way until now.
Absolutely. More is definitely needed to be done. And I think that's a good segue to Andy. And you've worked at the Century Foundation, really looking at unemployment insurance, workforce development, and also doing your work at Single Stop. Why manufacturing is the sectoral approach, and why should everyone care?
No, thanks, Michelle. Why manufacturing? It is, when you think about the communities that, where many of the conference attendees are today, from Baltimore, or where I'm from, Detroit, Chicago, manufacturing was the mainstay of the middle class, particularly the middle class for people of color. And deindustrialization, was a key component to driving inequity in our country. And, there was something said, though, we'll be just fine. We'll replace all those manufacturing jobs with the jobs of the future, and, everything will be better. And that has not been how it's worked out. The communities that lost manufacturing jobs, they're worse off, than they were. And I think it's a piece that we've regretted, not just for those communities, but for the whole country, during this pandemic, as we've struggled to, early on, to be able to even produce ventilators, produce masks, even the very basic, masks that we just need, textiles. We didn't have the production, capacity, for those basic things. And as we're thinking about the future, the green economy, as thinking about, increasing conflicts in the world like we have in Ukraine right now, a desire to maybe not be so dependent on foreign suppliers, and also knowing that if we don't make the innovative technologies of the future, we're not going to be as prosperous as a country as we once were. You think about the greatness of the American economy was coming out of World War II, aerospace, cars, the space race. These were pieces that made the U.S. economy in the forefront, and that's why manufacturing is so important. It is, when you look at it now, it's really changed. It used to be, these in cities, legacy manufacturers, everybody knew where they were. And, they knew that you could walk up and get a manufacturing job as long as you were willing to work hard and had a strong back. There were plenty of inequities in that period, but the jobs were accessible. And that's changed. The manufacturing jobs are more dispersed geographically. They're a little harder to find, more smaller companies, and also the skills profile has changed. And so it's still a pathway, however, that you can attain a middle-class lifestyle without a four-year degree. And you can't say that, about every place in our economy where workers without four-year college degrees work. The average worker in manufacturing in 2020 made $74,000 per year. And that was compared to less than $50,000 a year in retail, and less than $40,000 a year in our hospitality sector. So it's still a source of good paying jobs, and they're still accessible to people that don't have a four-year degree. Those are a couple of reasons why it's so important to me in our work.
Thanks so much, Andy. And when we think about repairing the harms that deindustrialization did to communities of color, What advice do you have for employers who may be predominantly white who are just getting involved in this work and just need to know how to get started?
Yeah, I think, the first thing is reaching out and making connection. Make connection to those organizations in your broader geography that, are serving and representing disenfranchised and underserved communities. Have them be a partner, not just to, at all levels, to introduce the sector, to help recruit workers, help workers succeed in those jobs. And then lastly, being willing to evolve your culture. Not to say that we need to do things the way we've always done them, because if we do that, we know that, the workforce of tomorrow is not the same as the workforce of today. And if you want to, make manufacturing a job of choice for the next generation is more diverse. You're going to have to change some of your cultures, and that can be it's everything, from the standards you have for the clothes you wear, and to the way you talk about, holidays and, habits and cultures. It's in every piece of your business. Thinking about what's that culture, on the factory floor. You're not tolerant of sexual harassment or harassment in any kind of way. You're trying to become an open, inclusive workplace. And that's not an easy transformation, to happen.
All right, thank you. It's a good segue also to Thanu around kind of fighting the anti-sexual harassment and making sure that we have a culture of belonging on the manufacturing floor. We really talk a lot about intersectionality of race and gender, affirming, making sure that women feel belonged in the workplace and that they do not have to worry about sexual harassment. What are your thoughts, Thanu, on intersectionality in manufacturing, particularly for women, and particularly for women of color in this sector?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I think that all the points that Andy and Erica made are so salient and so important when thinking about this issue. Is if a workplace culture, if an employer doesn't take into account the many identities that are held by their workers, especially for women of color, they're facing discrimination from both from their race or their ethnic background, but also from their gender. And so that also, in addition to the fact that there aren't a lot of representation, in the workforce. So women only account for 30% of the manufacturing workforce, people of color even less. So when you don't see yourself, in the workforce, in leadership in your organization, that can be a real challenge. And so, the more that employers, the more that institutions can sort of take that holistic approach, look at people from that perspective of multiple identities and multiple experiences that they're bringing to the table, and then think about their own cultural practices, their own workplace dynamics, and really put that at the forefront. I think that they're just going to be better positioned to support that workforce and actually see growth and see retention. Women and women of color especially will be staying in those jobs if they're respected and their identities are upheld.
Thanks so much, Daniel. I think that retention aspect is crucial, and that's what we're really trying to focus on in the cohort as well. I wanted to pose one final question to all of our panelists. Another theme of this conference is establishing a blueprint for progressive economic mobility. So if you had to lay out kind of that first step for establishing this blueprint, what would that be? So we'll go to Erica first, Andy, and then Thanu will close us out.
Great. Yeah, no, that's an important question. Our experience in Chicago, as we were really confronting, we knew that that manufacturing was still an important sector. And this is really going back, even 20 years ago at this point. Really, the first thing we did, recognizing that we were just one stakeholder, one entity, and this was a bigger problem that required more than just one. Like, this was bigger than just manufacturers by themselves could solve. This was bigger than what local government by themselves can solve. And based on what we saw in terms of international best practices, like in Germany and Denmark and other places, that have, similar systems. We convened all the key stakeholders that we knew that we needed to be part of whatever the solution was going to be, in terms of how do we have, in our case, Chicago be, a leader, a national, international leader in advanced manufacturing. So we started what we called now the Chicagoland Manufacturing Renaissance Council back in 2005. And that council has operated as, in varying degrees of loose to formalized network over these last years. But it's really been the critical, essential ingredient to all of our other, projects, whether it was starting a program to provide training for youth and young adults, or, the initiatives that we had, around economic development and creating early warning systems and succession ownership resources for companies. And other things along the way. The Renaissance Council was the umbrella. It was our go-to brain trust. So I would just say that has to be a critical component of, before you start to try and implement something programmatically, making sure you're convening that diverse stakeholder group that can help guide and inform and frankly have ownership and be champions for this work moving forward, because it will be hard, it will be complex. And if you're going to do it for the long term, you need that kind of support.
Thanks so much, Erica. Andy?
Well, I echo everything Erica said, but I will say that two points. Training has to be industry driven. It's no point to train people if it's not responsive, not just generally to what the industry needs, but specifically. You have to have specific employers in mind and what they say they need for either the entry-level workforce or incumbent worker training. So that's the first. Doesn't mean that you have to do everything that they say, but the training needs to be driven towards them. And I think the best programs are thoughtful about their industry partners and thinking about the ones where diverse workers are going to have the best chance of succeeding and the best chance of earning, a livable wage. So that's one piece. I think the other piece that they're both at the same time, and they ask for the first step, but building that trust in the community. Especially when we're talking about a sector like this, where people are like, I'm manufacturing, that's like 20 years ago. Why are you talking about that? You have to build the trust that this is actually, there are jobs here. The employers are, there, there are opportunities, really to build that trust, among the community. Listen to why so many job training efforts in the past have failed. How we should do this approach differently than the past. I think if you, especially with your key community leaders, if you do that early on, you're most likely to have not just the success of recruiting people into the program, but also making sure that community leaders have buy-in for when people have challenges in completing a program.
Great, thanks so much, Andy. And we'll end it with Tanu.
Yeah, I'll just add on to what Andy said about building trust. I think another thing that's just so important is to lay out and solidify success metrics and goals for outcomes that are community led and are upheld by all of the stakeholders. Just to be, clear on what success looks like, and who should be benefiting from this, and making sure that these the programs and the implementation is targeted towards those groups that you'd like to impact the most. And then also making sure that, you're collecting that data that's disaggregated by race and gender, other factors, make sure that, you make sure you're clear about who those beneficiaries are. I think it's just important to have that community buy-in and that kind of common goal that all stakeholders are working towards.
Absolutely. So really identifying the local champions, building that trust, and having those community outcomes are just great takeaways. And I want to thank our wonderful panelists for taking time to do this, and we look forward to answering your questions live. So thank you, everyone, and please feel free to ask us anything.
Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for attending our session. My name is Michelle Burris, and I am a cohort manager of the Industry and Inclusion cohort, which is hosted by the Century Foundation and the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. I have the opportunity to be interviewing Ms. Katrina Crane from the Menominee Valley Partners, and we're just going to have a short conversation about our experience and also her experience, particularly in Wisconsin and participation in the cohort. So hi, Katrina, it's great to be here. Thank you for making time to speak with me. So I'll just go ahead and get us started. And so my first question is really, if you could just introduce yourself and the initiatives that you work on in workforce development, and why is racial equity so important in your partnerships?
Sure. My name is Katrina Crane, as introduced. I'm the Director of Workforce and Business Solutions for the Menominee Valley Partners. Menominee Valley Partners is a business improvement district that is located in the heart of Milwaukee. We have over 150 businesses, all of which from small to large. There's a large cross-section of businesses that are here. Large section of them are the manufacturing industrial businesses, and we brought that back into the fold within Milwaukee. So in the past 25 years, this area lay dormant, and it was a large brownfield. Now it's one of the huge centers in Milwaukee for economic development. Lots of jobs and opportunity exist here. And we are figuring out ways to connect those jobs, opportunities with those who are in the surrounding areas. The surrounding areas of the Menominee Valley are the largest populated as far as density, but it also has a huge population of our Black and Brown community. So our goal is to create relationships between the businesses in the Menominee Valley and those neighborhoods surrounding it to get into some of these really great family-centered jobs.
Great, thank you so much. In the industry and inclusion cohort, we really are trying to dive in and why culturally competent and trauma-informed practices matter when working with communities of color. Can you speak more to that and what approaches you use? What have been best practices that Menominee Valley Partners uses?
So I can say that being a part of this has really taught me what different entities are doing from a variety of places throughout the United States, and really helps to shed a light on some of the challenges that we all face in creating opportunity to understand new ways to create linkages. And so many of the things that I learned, especially from the standpoint of language, there's so much that most don't realize when it comes to language and how much that's changed. And I learned that specifically from being a part of this cohort, like the word manufacturing as one, and not using necessarily manufacturing, but using like automation or that type of thing. So that's been awesome to understand how to build that, as well as how I feel that being a part of this cohort has been able to teach me some of the different methods that we are using. So some of the things that we're doing right now is trying to figure out how to create opportunities for middle management. And, looking at many of our businesses and saying that, where you see minorities, honestly, is in the line employee and not that in middle management or higher. And so when you're looking at how to make decisions on your workforce, on policy, on development, on processes, you're not seeing us at the table and making sure that many of our businesses understand this and realize how to make that change. So we've created programming that is much like training for those who are either higher up managers as well as middle managers. We've provided opportunities to teach those who are in line positions to give them management skills so there's upward mobility. We also created a program that will help those who are in entry-level positions to get into management level roles. So we're looking at this in a variety of standpoints and ensuring that we are looking at equity and equality from bottom up and top down. So some of the programs that we had just recently created, like there was an equitable learning class, and in that equitable learning, we're teaching those who are in roles right now the many barriers that those of Brown and Black communities face just coming to work on a daily basis that many don't realize or don't understand. One of the things or challenges that we have here in Milwaukee, if you've read about Milwaukee, it is seen as one of the most racist, or not racist, but racially divided cities in the United States. And So there's a lot of barriers that come into play that many don't understand, and that's what that training actually does. It gives them a vantage point to understand these are some of the issues or some of the concerns that many of your workers have and how your policies are not in line with their needs. And it has been pretty eye-opening for many of those who have been participating.
Great, thank you so much. And I think the occupational segregation is really what we are trying to really dive into at an industry and inclusion cohort, looking at why, it's not just bringing Black and brown workers into the workforce, but also ensuring that there's a path to mobility. I just want to go deeper in what you mentioned about language. Some people have mentioned how manufacturing is in need of a national paradigm shift. And to your point that, maybe using automation instead of manufacturing. Could you speak more to when we think about just the paradigm shift and what does that mean? Let's say, for instance, if we're partnering with educational institutions and hoping to help high school students understand what this sector means, how does language and having this paradigm shift matters?
Oh, it matters deeply. And I'm realizing that. So we created a program recently because, again, many of our areas that are within the Menominee Valley, we realized that in order to get our younger workforce involved or to get or attract them, we need to figure out ways to do that differently. And so what we created recently is our rotational engineering internship. And in that internship, we were able to gain from those who were participants how to explain it? We realize the differences that are needed for that group to feel like they're connected culturally, that they, and being able to take that information and kind of infuse that with some of our employers. So them actually seeing how employees actually resonate with, or these students resonated with certain areas or aspects of what they're putting out. And actually, we were just talking about this today. You know what, this is recorded. So I'm going to ask if you can ask the question again, because there's a piece that I wanted to make sure that I hit.
Sure.
Yeah, if you can ask the question again for me.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure.
Just, you were mentioning how language matters, when we talk about automation versus manufacturing, and some people say that manufacturing needs a paradigm shift because it's too often framed as the low skill, lowest wage job and not a vibrant career framed with technology and upward mobility. And I was just, you're already starting on that path on why it matters, why that language and why that paradigm shift matters, especially in communities of color.
Yeah, and going back to that, so good. Thank you for doing that. But looking at one of the issues that we were having even were the books that the students had in class were so old and so outdated. So when they looked at manufacturing or understanding STEM-related coursework or the types of career paths that were involved, their thought process as to what that is and what it looks like, so different than what they're being taught. And so getting those students, the paradigm shift is when you're applying for jobs and things. Now, these students aren't just looking at the job description. It's the culture of the environment. It is what the environment looks like. It's what it feels like. And then it's the language as to how you are projecting yourself to that employee and how they see themselves with creating this career pathway. And so we're teaching that and with these internships that we're doing, as well as bringing youth into our pipeline and getting them to tour some of these businesses and understanding that, which is something that many of our older leaders did not realize as far as a shift that's needed. So even when it comes to just job fairs, some of the things that we've shifted is that a job fair shouldn't just literally be just sitting at a table and going back and forth. We need to actually provide these young adults with the opportunity to see the environment and then to be able to speak to that and share with them what this environment looks like, share with them what are the expectations, but then hear from them as to what their needs are and how we can accommodate those things. So it is to say that it's a shift in teaching some of these employers what that shift looks like has been a difficult challenge because they're used to, some of these businesses are, back 100 years and are used to doing things in a certain way that doesn't benefit those today. So we've had to really, really streamline and share with them and give them the feedback in a different way. And I think our organization has benefited the manufacturing industry in that way by being that I serve as like a middleman or intermediary between those schools and their needs and where they are now, but how to bridge the management and business styles and create this middle passage. And we're definitely seeing that. We're definitely seeing now how, one of the things that I can even bring up is even job fairs. We brought up in the past that, when you're going out and looking for individuals to apply for these jobs, where are you going? And they are going to the Marquette or to the MSOE here, which are predominantly white institutions. Have you not figured out how to make, pathways to HBCUs?
Yeah.
Here in Milwaukee, no, we do not have HBCUs, but we do have schools that are predominantly Black and brown, students. So what are you doing to connect to those schools? So one of the things that we plan to do this year, maybe twice this year, is reaching out to those schools and creating a job fair here in the Valley with the focus on those schools that they typically hadn't built relationships with. There's a variety of different ways to do that, and it definitely builds a pathway that we had not had before. And I do think it's going to lead to more individuals of Black and brown descent being hired into middle management and higher roles.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to drive on your point with the educational institutions and Black and brown communities and Black and brown students. So as you know, this conference is taking place at an HBCU at Coppin State, and their theme is really looking at a blueprint for economic mobility and also achieving the future of manufacturing through racial equity. Along that lines, what advice do you have for the attendees, many of whom might be in business, many of whom might be in industry, some may be professors at an HBCU, who may be or those who may just be getting started, or even employers who are not of color and want to just get started and dive into this work? What advice would you give them?
So two things. For the students, I would say that, this is your chance. This is to me, over the past 4 to 5 years, the way that the world has changed, and honestly, it's at the pushing and urging of your age group, who have actually really shed light on the fact that things aren't the way that I want it to be, so now you need to listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the manufacturers now have realized they need you more than you realize they need you, which gives you that opportunity to really push, this is what I want to get out of a career if I choose you as my employer of choice, and look at it more like that, because you do have that opportunity to do that more than any of us in the past have had. And I push that with many of our young adults, because again, if you are showcasing your talent, which you do have this particular talent, you've gotten the skill set that you need, but what they don't have is a voice that comes from a Black or brown person at the table. And they need that in order to chart differences or to change processes. Show that and showcase how you're going to be relevant. The second thing from the employer standpoint is to realize all you can do is jump in. Stop thinking through what change management is going to mean. Really jump into these programs and then formulate that with those individuals in mind. You can't create a program on your own when you don't have Black and brown audiences at the table. And many of these businesses are trying to do that. In order to create a program that's going to pull those individuals, you have to include those individuals. So if it's not an opportunity for you to look at your staff in order to bring a well-rounded group together, and in order to help build that recruitment pipeline, you need to bring in those who have done well. And don't be afraid of the fact of saying, the recreation of the wheel. If there's an organization or business that's near you that's doing well, pull them in. Here in Milwaukee, again, I'm a part of a business improvement district. There are several of us. We're working together in order to make sure that our businesses at all levels understand, how we can build equity throughout the businesses. And so look at that and create your linkages. Utilize what you're learning today. I mean, you never know, there could be partners that you're reaching out to today or connecting with today that can be your bread and butter for tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Katrina. I think those are all of my questions, but I just wanted to give you the last couple minutes, just if you wanted to add any insights, anything that I should have asked, or anything about your cohort experience, or even how it can be better, how we can scale. Just wanted to give you the last few minutes to add anything that I should have asked.
I think your questions were really good. I think, for us, actually hearing from students who are at HBCUs and how we're trying to build our level of engagement can be impactful as well. And especially for someone who's like me, because again, we don't have the HBCU audience that's surrounding us.
Yeah.
And so some of our businesses are stating, well, how do we make these inroads? How do we connect to these students? And, the fact that they do have these opportunities all across the board. So I am doing what I feel is best at this level with what we have in the Milwaukee area, but I would love to grow that where they are sending their recruiters to some of our HBCUs and looking at some of these great leaders. So creating a pathway that our businesses can actually utilize and learn from, I think could be awesome.
Thank you so much. And that student voice is so important, especially in HBCUs, when we go through different issues of funding, recently the bomb threats, just trying to have equitable institutions. And I think hearing the voices of actual students really centers and just helping to continue to build that manufacturing ecosystem. That was the end of our session. Thank you so much, Ms. Katrina, for this fascinating conversation. I think the attendees are really going to enjoy, particularly how they can continue to build an ecosystem and how they can build future partnerships, whether they've been doing this work for 10, 20 years, really thriving as you are, or just getting started. So thank you for making time to provide these insights for everyone.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.